Hello, beautiful ladies. Welcome to Wamen Hour. And tonight I have a new guest joining me. Thank you very much, Tasha, for coming tonight.
Hello, thank you for having me. It's a privilege.
Yeah, it's a bit of a random one today. You're a writer on Substack, so I've been reading what you've been putting. You've got two articles already, is that right?
Yeah, I'm just finding my way. It's just getting into it slowly.
I've been doing it for 5 years, and I'm still finding my way. Good luck to you. And your Substack is called Gen X, is that right?
Yeah, Gen X.
I'll
Gen
leave.
X anecdotes. Yeah.
Okay, I'll put that in the description. People will be able to find you there.
Thank you.
And the topic I wanted to talk to you about tonight is one of your articles about, how would you describe it? I wanted to talk about the emotional development of children and the what Jonathan Haidt calls the coddling of the American mind, but of course we're talking about an English context. And
Yeah.
it seems that you've got first-hand experience of what are we doing to our kids? What's the public sector, the
Ooh,
teachers, childcare? What's going
where
on? Well, I
where
my
to
kids
start?
my kids are still too small to be in that world, so you can prepare me for what what we're in for.
How old are yours?
3 and 1.
Right, okay. So, are you going to any of these sort of like soft plays and mum groups or anything like that yet? Are you?
Yeah, yeah. I've got plenty of relationship talking to other mums and try to get them playing with other kids as much as possible. I my personal experience with other mums is has been pretty positive. Like none of them are really crazy or really weird. But maybe I live outside of London, so I don't know what's what it's like in other places.
Yeah, I mean, we moved last year and we were living in Brighton, and and yeah, I mean, I mean, it depends. There were quite a lot of mums that I met that were fine, but then there were quite a lot who were just on a really different page to me when it came to parenting. And that's fine when they're really little, but when you start to have sort of play dates and your kid starts hanging out with other children, it can become an issue. They're on
There's
really
this
different pages.
there's this awkward moment that I feel when the kids are playing together with someone else's children are there, and the mum, both me and the other mum were both there, and there's this moment where one of the kids like snatches from the other or does something bad, and
Mm.
I need to either tell off my daughter or I need to like tell off someone else's kid. And I feel like I'm being judged either way, if I'm too lenient or if I'm too mean. I feel like the other, like, I don't know what the other mum's parenting style is, so I don't know if I'm about to step over a boundary. But if something's going on and I feel the need to interrupt, I feel very awkward to do that.
Yeah, yeah, it's a complete minefield. And I actually had, oh God, it's a long story, but when my daughter was in last school in Brighton, and we had a kind of bit of a sort of friendship group going. I had a bit of a run in with a couple of the parents over me telling off the daughter actually.
Someone else's
um,
daughter.
yeah, yeah. But the thing is, I previously worked in childcare, so it's really natural for me to just kind of like tell off other people's kids because I'm just so used to doing it. And then I have to sort of turn around to the mum and go, "Oh, I'm really sorry. It's just that I work with kids, and I'm just kind of used to doing that." So, and they kind of look at you like, "Oh my gosh," But I mean, if it was the other way round, I wouldn't mind at all. If I thought my daughter was being out of order and there was a mum said something,
Yeah,
I, you
absolutely.
know, yeah,
When I
I'll
see
be.
a mum in public who I think is handling a situation well, I feel so like I'm cheering her on. Like I want to go over and give her a high five. Like not getting really shouty or being like really aggressive, but just stepping in at just the right moment to shut
Yeah.
down bad behavior. I go like, yes, do it. Like you're doing it.
Yeah, because public places. I mean, I remember chatting to a friend of mine, and he didn't have any kids or anything. And when my daughter was really young, because I really drummed in, me and my husband really drummed in the manners thing, because we think manners is really important. No snatching, please and thank you. Sitting at the dinner table, and being generally sharing with other children, like not trashing their toys and stuff like that. Just general kind of behavioural stuff. And I remember saying to this friend, he said, God, she's so polite, your daughter. And we were just like, well, we just thought she was normal, really. That was just sort of normal level of politeness. And he was just saying the amount of times he goes to cafes and restaurants, and then there's just kids just throwing stuff around and screaming and running around, and the parents aren't doing anything. And, you know, you have it on aeroplanes with a kid kicking the back of your chair. And I mean, I actually told off a kid behind me. I just, you know, and then the mum looked at me like I was mad, you know, like, and I just turned around and I said, oh, I'm sorry, do you mind? But he's been kicking the back of my chair for the last hour, you know. And the mum
Some
was just sort
kids,
of
you
sat
can
there
tell
doing
that
nothing.
some kids have never been told off in their whole life, and they have a really strong reaction even to a gentle reprimand. I've
Yeah.
noticed. You know, it happens with other people's kids. If you you know, I stopped a kid who was playing with a pit full of sand, like a sand pit. It was
Mm.
it was an indoor sand pit, which is just, it was really quite.
That's not a good idea.
I was really like on edge the whole time, and this kid got 2 handfuls of sand and picked it up and like started running away from the sand pit, and I was like, no, sweetheart, sand stays in the sand pit. And this girl just like looked at me and started crying. She was so
Oh,
she was
you
so
see
upset
that?
that
You
I had
see that you
stopped her.
probably used negative language, Poe. We don't use negative language. We use positive language. So what you're supposed to say is it a good idea to take the sand away from the sand? I could go. I mean, this is part of the thing that I wanted to talk about or rant about was part of this. This has been going on for years, but when I did my training, because I did my training back in sort of like 2008. I previously worked in offices for years, and temping and all sorts of, you know, in between. I was doing music and stuff, but I was working in offices during the day. And I'd noticed, this is a convoluted story, by the way, but I'm starting off with the office work stuff. But I noticed when I first started working in offices back in the 80s, um, there were lots of sort of like rules about hierarchy. We were expected to dress smart. There were rules about timekeeping, a lot of rules about politeness and professionalism, like how we dealt with customers and clients. And it was quite formal. And there was very strict formal rules about how you typed up letters, to the point where if you missed out a comma, you'd have to do it again, things like that. Spelling, how it, you know, everything was really, there was a really high standards, basically.
Yeah,
And then
standards is exactly the word I was going to use.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and this is, I mean, the reason I'm drawing this analogy is because I think that all the while I was noticing these changes through the sort of late 80s, through the 90s, I think these changes were also going on in education with children and parenting as well. Was this sort of like just decline in standards? And in when I was working in all these different offices around, I mean, I was temping around London for years, you know, in all different kind of industries, and from big sort of corporate places to tiny small companies. But the one thing that I noticed was once emails came along, then there was a kind of loosening in the way people communicated. So it was no longer that the letters had to be written really, and with that came sort of like more casual dress codes, more flexible working hours, all these things that I really welcomed at the time. I was like, oh, this is great. You know, it's not so
Can,
formal.
can I ask you, did you used to refer to your superiors by their surname?
Sometimes.
I felt like when I first started work, I felt really awkward. I didn't know whether I was supposed to use first names or surnames. Everyone else is using first names, so I just went with that. And it's been fine. No one's ever had a problem with it, as far as I know. But it's one of those things that I think that's something that used to be really normal a few decades ago. That and you know, saying now most of the emails I get in my inbox, they start with hi or hello, not
Yeah.
dear Mrs. Poe or anything. It's all just
Yeah.
hi, just to let you know. Thanks.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, even I've had letters come through the post recently, which are meant to be sort of, you know, when you get kind of junk mail letters from an estate agent or something, and I'm looking at it and just, there's all these spelling errors and stuff like, you know, and this is like a kind of glossy thing that's been sent out, and it's like, have they not even checked? So it's this sort of general thing, and I think what happened with, so I mean, I kind of welcomed a more relaxed environment because I was in my early 20s. I was kind of like, oh, this is great, you know. But what came with that, so there was also, with the informality, politeness kind of went out the window. So my whole thing is like, when politeness started declining with children as well, we also had a weird kind of rise in dishonesty. Like, people stopped being so straightforward at the same time, if that makes sense. So people were like, you'd go to interviews and people would be very polite to you, but if you were like, if you weren't, doing your work well, you'd be called in, and the manager would be very polite and be very formal, but he'd be also very, very straightforward in saying, like, this isn't good enough, you need to do this and this and this. And you'd be like under no illusion about what was going on there. It would be very clear. So what happened was, we had a decline in manners, but at the same time a rise in sort of like what I call sort of convoluted sort of management speak started creeping in, huge HR departments started creeping in, and all these policies started creeping in. So it's a really strange thing in that when I started working, in some ways it was more casual, in that you could go for a job interview, and if the manager liked you, he'd say, I really like you, do you want to start tomorrow? And I'd be like, well, don't you want to check my references? He'd be like, I'm sure it's fine, I've just got a good feeling about you. But then they'd be able to get rid of you quicker, So it was kind of, it's a very strange kind of.
Well, those things are related, right? If you can just fire someone when you don't like them, then you just hire them, like whatever. Like, start on Monday, we'll pay you for the 2 days you're here, and if you turn out to be rubbish, we can just get rid of you. That, like, it's actually making it harder to fire people makes it harder to hire them.
Yes, exactly. But I just found that there was more of an honesty. I mean, I knew where I was, and you just had to just get on with it. And if you were good at your job, then you'd be rewarded. But if you weren't, if you weren't that good, it was they'd say, look, I'm sorry, it's not working out. And they wouldn't be rude about it or anything, but it was just the way it was. But maybe there was just more work around as well. But I mean, I found then with all the sort of introduction of what I would call management speak, it became obviously a lot more difficult to fire people, but then it became a lot less clear. I found it almost, you'd be sent to HR and you wouldn't quite know why you're sitting there for, and there'd be like two people sitting there with notepads, and they'd be discussing sort of like all these things about your job. And I found that the way that they spoke was really kind of phony and not real. The kind of language, it just felt, I didn't really know where I stood with these people. It all felt a bit kind of administrative and formal and all around these policies, but they'd be smiling at you at the same time. And you'd be sort of thinking, hang on, am I being told off here? What's going on? Because they can't actually say, because it's all wrapped up in this sort of positive language speak. And I think we've done the same. I think the same was going on in schools. Weirdly, it's like with kids, it's kind of like what you were saying about, saying no to that kid. Now, I mean, I had to go on a training course last week. I'm currently working in my daughter's school, and it was all about this sort of empowerment thing. And I mean, a lot of that's about the language you use. So we don't use bad behavior. They stop using bad behavior. They stop using bad child. Then they stopped using the word bad behavior. Then they started calling it challenging behavior. And now they don't say that anymore. They call it unexpected behavior. It's mad. Oh, that was, and the kid will literally sort of throw something across the room. Or, I mean, I literally saw a kid spit food out in another kid's face. And the adult went, oh, that was unexpected, wasn't it? Let's have a chat about it, shall we? And whereas my instinct would be going, well, I would just go, no, you don't do that, because they know you don't do that. So you just the way I deal with it would be no, and I'd be very firm about it. You're not doing that. I'm going to move you to a different table, and you're going to sit on your own now. But I'm not even allowed to really do that, because so that's the whole thing. And then when I started doing my MVQ in sort of 2009. That was to do with play work. So I ended up managing after school clubs, holiday clubs, helping out in schools as well at lunchtimes and things like that. So, and that was what I ended up doing after all the office stuff. And it became really obvious to me after I did 2 years of training, and I worked in all these schools in London. it became really obvious that a lot of the training was useful. Like the first aid stuff was useful. There was a lot of stuff around play work and games and how kids play with each other. That was all quite useful. The behaviour stuff was really it it felt completely unintuitive. You know, it was all this sort of positive speak, and I felt like, hang on, am I rewarding them? What's going on here? You know, and then when I started working in schools, I realised that I had to just throw all that out the window, because when you're in real life with a load of kids, all that stuff doesn't actually really work. It just doesn't, you know.
I think that the school or the nursery or whatever it is, they need to cover themselves legally so that they are not held responsible if you make some kid cry and their mum complains.
Yeah.
They're giving you all this training about how to be nice so that they can put it on you. Basically, the training makes them alleviates their blame in the scenario, I think.
Yeah, it's all putting plasters on things. It's all short term. So it might be easier in the short term to have sort of feely talky sessions with kids, and and then I've noticed it will last for about 5-10 minutes, and then the next day they'll do it again, and then it's another feely talky session about, oh, we don't do that, do we? Do you remember we had a chat about that? And because there's actually no consequences, you can see the kids are just like, there's nowhere to go from there. I mean, I suggested to someone quite recently, if a kid's really badly behaved, really rude, and does it over and over, can we not give them a couple of warnings and then they sit out their lunch break? I mean, I think that's fair enough. And the staff members just looked at me and just went, oh no, we definitely don't do that anymore. And I was like, why? And they're saying, oh no, because that's considered sort of really tyrannical. So I think
I think what they consider tyrannical is making anyone feel bad for any reason.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
At some point, I don't know how it happened or why, but the people in power, the people who control the laws around it and the guidelines and the training, they started to be replaced with people who just don't want to make anyone feel bad. Like you don't make the student feel like they've been reprimanded, or the thing is that to be corrected, even in the nicest way, to realize that you've done something wrong and that you've hurt someone else, or you've upset your peer group, it is upsetting. Like, it's intrinsically upsetting, but it's just part of life.
Yeah.
It's the only way you learn, really.
Yeah. And, I just think it's a weird pathological kind of aversion to anything to do with rules, boundaries, structure, hierarchy. There's all that as well. So everything has to be kind of like flattened out, and anything to do with any of those things is just considered. I mean, on a big scale in society, anything to do with those things is considered like really sort of, I don't know, tyrannical and oppressive.
Yeah, tyrannical, yeah.
Yeah. And it's just absolutely bonkers if you're applying that to children. Because the other thing about all this convoluted language, that this kind of management speak that they use with children, all this, oh, do we do this and we do that, and not using the word bad, and not using even the words right or wrong, and not having these kind of distinctions. It's all sort of like murky and kind of like everything's fine. It's all good. We're all just going to be positive all the time. And kids their brains don't work like that. Like children from a really young age, you're probably noticing with your 3-year-old, they're really binary. It's like good, bad, woman, man. I like that. I hate that. That's how they make sense of the world.
Yeah, they can't. They're not developed enough for shades of grey for sort of nuanced thinking. So this is actually a development to a baby can't understand anything. They don't have an opinion about everything. Just unexpected.
Yes.
To come back to that word from earlier,
unexpected behavior.
To go from everything being completely incomprehensible to having some things be good and some things be bad is a huge development for a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. And
Yeah.
it's only after that that they can start to understand nuance a little bit.
Yeah. And I think they're I think the adults are just doing it for themselves because they don't want to feel bad.
Can I
In a
tell you
lot of
why I think it's happening? And
yeah,
I've only just been thinking about this while we've been talking.
yeah,
I think that if you, whether it's in the workplace or whether it's children or anything, when
mm,
you have a culture of standards and correcting unexpected behavior, what happens is that some people are, it shows up some people as being better than others. So some children are going to be well behaved and polite. Maybe those are the
mm,
children who are being reprimanded at home. Maybe they're just naturally quieter, gentler children. But
mm,
when you have a culture of reprimanding and correcting children, what you'll see is that there are some children who get it a lot more than
yeah,
others. And that seems unfair. It seems unfair to that child's parents, probably because they have a sort of rose tinted view of what their kid is capable of and how well behaved they are. So they're
mm,
going to start complaining about that. But also, there's just this culture. I'm sure you've heard of boomer truth regime, right?
yeah.
There's
AAs,
just this
yeah,
culture, like just anything that's like different between people. Our differences have to be celebrated. They're not a bad thing. There's no good children and bad children. To unfairly make one child feel bad all the time by telling them off constantly is unfair. I think in sort of boomer truth, this is just the philosophy that's been
yeah,
encroaching more and more.
yeah, and it's everywhere. It's in everything, and it's completely back. I mean, it's totally backwards. But in at the same time, they they are they are being unfair because what they're doing is like the tyranny of the minority.
Mm.
it's it's like, but the crappiest, most dysfunctional minority
And those kids,
are being celebrated. So the kids that are they're getting all the attention, and all the normal kids that are just getting on with it and doing fine get pretty much ignored. And they're seeing these special, because there's also all these labels like the ADHD, the neurodivergence, and every week there's a new label. And I see mums who are desperate to get their kids assessed, to go through the system, to be put, to actually have one of these labels so they can get one-to-one help in the classroom. And I'm not saying that there is no such thing as like autism and all these things. I know that these things obviously exist, but I think that, like with everything, it's just spilled out to include kids who don't have any boundaries and who have just not learned any boundaries and who are acting out. And
yeah,
they're saying, oh, well, no, this kid has this. So it's not about them anymore. It's about passing the buck onto something else rather than the parents actually.
you put it on the label, yeah.
Yeah, then they can just sort of not have to deal with the fact that they gave into the kids every tantrum because they just wanted to be nice and they didn't want to be the bad guy. And actually, if you work with kids or if you're a parent, at some point there's going to be a kid. If you're doing your job right, I think at some point a kid is going to go, I hate you, you're mean. And you have to just, like, that's part of what it is. It's like, I don't care if you think I'm mean. This is actually how it's going to have to go down because I'm the adult and you're the child. And that distinction as well is just eroded. We've got this whole thing where, oh, the kids lead and we're going to learn from them. The whole Greta Thunberg thing, it's mental because it's like I see it with kids when I've been strict with kids and, in after school clubs and things, and they hate me to begin with. And then after a few weeks, they'll spend a week like avoiding me when I've told them off. And then after a few weeks, they start coming to me and talking to me.
Yeah.
And it's
The
because
kids
they
like
feel,
it, yeah.
yeah, well, they feel safe. It's like, at last, someone's being honest with me.
The boundary, the children actually they flourish with the boundaries.
They
They
need it. They need it.
when they know where the boundary is, that gives them freedom to explore that boundary within the boundary. I mean, they know exactly what behavior is right, and it's the
Mm,
same with the workplace. When you know exactly how to address someone,
yeah.
then you can always feel confident when you're doing it right. You know
Yeah.
that you haven't been rude to them because you don't have to think about how to sign off your email because this is my superior, so I'll write best regards or whatever. It's
Everyone knows
completely
where they
counter.
are. Everyone knows where they are,
Yeah.
and there is an order to things. And I think, you know, and I'm really sort of shocked to hear myself say this, because I spent the sort of pretty much the whole of my 20s railing against any kind of order and anything that was going to trap me, you know, and I was very much, you know, I did a lot of traveling. I was, you know, that was my personality type. And to an extent, I still don't enjoy anyone telling me what to do. But when it comes to, I mean, that was the biggest sort of red pill for me, was becoming a mum in a way, because I suddenly realized that the whole load of things that I'd been told were just not true. You know, it's, I don't know whether you saw Morgoth on Twitter. I thought this was really good the other
And I do follow
day.
him, but I don't know exactly what you're talking about. I can get it up on the
Yeah.
screen if you like.
No, I just, oh, you, let me just see. It was 4 days ago. And it was in response to that. There was an American woman who went on this Majority Report thing, and she was talking about somebody physically attacked her on a train. It was a kind of like homeless guy, and she was saying how it was bourgeoisie of her.
Yeah, I saw other tweets about this, but not more.
Yeah. So it's this whole sort of mental gymnastics. How, you know, how dare I be upset by this guy attacking me, because obviously I'm a white woman, and you know, I've got to take this whole thing. And he said essentially progressivism is about rationalizing the process of unlearning the most basic human, perhaps even mammalian instincts. And it takes a lot of mental firepower to reduce yourself to this degree of retardation and sheer stupidity. And I just read that and I just thought, well, that's just basically sums it all up, you know, in terms of the mental gymnastics. Like this course I had to do the other day about empowerment for kids. It was all this absolutely convoluted stuff, which to me just seemed like a cope to get out of actually doing any disciplining or reprimanding, which seems to me the most obvious thing. Yeah, that's the one. It seems to be the most obvious thing that the kids that would work with the kids and that they're crying out for. You know.
Yeah, that's the real tragedy, is that these children, if they're not getting any discipline or boundaries at home, they're the ones who need it the most in the
Yes.
school setting, in the social setting. You know, if these children are mistreating other children, they are not going to be popular. They're not going to be liked. They're not going to be invited to birthday parties, and they suffer from that.
Yeah.
And that it's really sad, I think.
It's tragic. Yeah, they're not. And I mean, I noticed it when I first. Hang on, I've got a microphone malfunction here. The whole thing's come off. The whole thing's come off. Yeah, so the whole thing's come off the side of the table here. So I'm just going to have to
we can still hear you. So,
hold the microphone in my hand like I'm about to sing a song.
Oh, great.
but I won't. I won't sing a song. I promise.
Maybe at the end.
But what was I saying? I forgot what I was saying now.
Yeah, the thing about this this idea of like the bourgeois, you know, being appalled by the behavior of homeless people. Like, just try saying that about catcalling, and we'll see.
I know.
You know, it's such a double standard. It's pointless pointing out double standards sometimes. But I actually, when it comes to catcalling, I mean, you're do you mind calling if I call you a bit more working class than I am?
Yeah, I am.
A bit less bourgeois. I think
I'm definitely not bourgeois.
the middle class disdain for the catcalling, or just people being a bit more familiar in public, saying darling, saying love. It comes out in these people complaining that this riffraff is trying to be familiar with me and invading my space. And why can't they just leave me alone? And it's always obvious like who they're talking about. They're not talking about Don Draper, these, they're not talking about upper class white guys who are hitting on them. That's not typically what happens.
It's a classist thing. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're definitely right there. And I remember
when it comes to the homeless guy on the train, I think it's right to have boundaries, and it's not you can't just shut up and put up with it for the sake of social harmony.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's having someone physically trying to attack you is different to having some guy going, hello, darling. Which is a bit, it can be a bit annoying. But I remember when excuse me, I've still my throat's hurting a bit. I remember when the whole Me Too thing was happening, and a friend of mine, um, I was on Facebook. That was in the days when I was still on Facebook, and it just descended into this just unbearable whinge fest. All these women going, "Oh no, I got touched on the knee, and it was terrible and traumatizing," and it was just like a competition. It just started off with really bad things that had happened, and it just sort of descended to this sort of like pettiness, like a boss asked me out for a drink, and all this kind of stuff. Or
Yeah,
someone tooted me out, and my friend rung me up, and she was going, "Oh, for God's sake, these bloody women!"
but it's true. I think when bourgeois middle class women, we are so sheltered from being confrontational. We don't have that response of being able to be rude to men who are
give as
overstepping
good
their
as you
boundaries.
get.
Just say no, leave me alone. I don't want this, and sort of standing up for yourself. Yeah, I don't know if you've they have a big problem with this in Japan, where the women, just people in general, are much more what would you call it? A lot more reserved. They
Yeah,
don't
I've been
express.
I've been I've been to Japan. They're very,
Okay.
yeah, much more reserved. Yeah.
They to express anything as an absolute is quite impolite in their language. So they have
Yes.
this problem where women who are being abused in public, and men who are taking photos of them, getting too close to them on the train, or taking photos of their skirts is a big problem.
Mm,
And the
yeah.
women, it's happening, like they know that it's happening, they want it to stop,
Mm,
but they physically don't have the habit, they don't have the resolve to speak aloud
yeah.
like their displeasure with the situation. If they said, "Help me, that something bad is happening," other passengers would take her side, but they don't.
Yeah.
It's like that
It's a very,
these
very weird culture, Japan. I mean, I was so sorry. Carry on. Carry on with what you
no
were
it's,
saying.
I was just if I can go to an even further divergence. I always think about this part in the Gulag Archipelago when the author's talking about what it's like to be arrested in Soviet Russia, where the way that they arrest you is just some men in plain clothes will just come up to you and say, "Come with us, please," and you'll be escorted. Not no handcuffs, no kicking and screaming, no squad car or anything. They'll
Mm,
just escort you to the nearest police station, and it's just such an unexpected thing to happen for most people that they just don't know how to respond. They'll just go because
mm,
they're completely baffled. That why am
mm,
I being arrested? This is a mistake. But instead of flailing around and saying like these men are arresting me, like help me,
yeah.
they'll just be led silently like like cattle to the slaughter because
That
it's just
is. It's
it's
yeah.
not there's not a you don't get into the habit of doing that,
No.
of standing up for yourself and making a noise.
And it's
So I
only in
think that
hindsight, isn't it, that you think, "Oh, I should have said that, or I should have done that," but you're not. Yeah, I mean, I think there was something that went around on Twitter recently, which was a video of this guy. You know those roller things that you take the fluff and hair off clothes
yeah, lint
with the
roller, yeah.
handle? Yeah, one of those lint rollers. He was stood outside a building. I think it was a shop, and he was just a guy just doing this as a laugh, and he was getting people to put their arms out like they're about to be frisked, and he was rolling this roller over them and then saying, "Okay, you can go." And everyone just stood in front of him and put their arms out automatically and didn't even ask, "Who are you and why are you doing this?" And he
Yeah,
was just doing them, and everyone just went along with it, and it was just so hilarious, and that no one just
yeah,
asked.
basically, yeah.
Yeah,
If
so
you
it's the
if
same.
you've seen other people do it before you, then it's going to seem weird if you don't do it. Like
Yeah,
you'll
and you're
just
just gonna think that's what we're doing now, but I mean, I don't know. It's scary, isn't it? Really, in a way.
there's this to further go down this path, but there's I think about this book, Thinking Fast and Slow, a lot. Yeah, it's one of those pop psych books
Oh,
that
I've
was quite
heard
popular a
about
few
that.
years ago.
Yeah.
And most of your life you spend what they call thinking fast, which is taking like mental shortcuts. You just do the normal thing. You do what everyone else is doing.
Hmm.
It's easier than trying to figure things out and to mentally comprehend, like calculate things. It takes a lot of literal physical energy in your brain, which
Hmm.
if you use that all the time, you'd be completely exhausted and burnt out by like 9:45 in the morning.
Oh, yeah. You
So
can't.
you have to use a lot of habits and a lot of shortcuts, And if you don't know what to do, you'll just do what everyone else is doing. When presented with a new situation you've never been in before, the default is just to do what everyone else does. And the only people who don't do that are like lunatics.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm, you know, I think you've got to have a slight, well, it's not just lunatics. Some people are just, it's that disagreeable thing, isn't it? Or not minding to stand out.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
not, because I think that's the other thing is people don't, they don't want to stand out. You know, it's kind of mortifying for them. If everyone's doing one thing, they don't want to be the one person not doing it. You know, so I mean, there's probably some deep instincts in there. But back to the catcalling thing.
Yeah, thanks for getting me back on track. Go on.
No, because my friend who rang me, it was really funny because she grew up in Essex, and well, she's really well spoken actually for someone who, but she grew up in Essex.
I grew up in Essex.
Oh right, well there you go. Maybe you know each other, but she was saying that when she's kind of like my age group, she was saying, oh, for God's sake, she's saying, you know what we used to do on a Saturday night? We used to get all dressed up and walk up and down the road, hoping that we'd get tooted up, you know. And that was when she was like 50. She said my mum would have just gone mad if she found out that we were doing that, and that was her and her friend. You know, and I mean, I'd be absolutely mortified if I thought my daughter was doing that. But basically, you know, she was just saying, "Oh God, they just need to get over themselves." And I mean, I think also with the builders on the building site banter thing. I mean, I don't think they do it anymore. I would be surprised if they do it so much anymore these days. I mean, it used to be really common that if you walk past a building site, you know, it'd be like, "Oi, darling," you know. But it would be actually, I used to shout back at them. And just give them just loads of, you know, hassle back, and
can I ask you,
inevitably,
is that a class distinction, or is that something particular to you, or what? Like what is that? That's something that I would never do. I'd feel completely mortified doing that. So what's the difference between you and me? Is it a class thing?
It possibly, but I think it's a personality trait. I'm just, you know, not very. I'm quite mouthy, I guess.
Have you seen? This is a weird one. Have you seen With Nail and I, the movie?
Yes, I love it.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking about the scene of the
Scrubbers!
With Nail that hangs out the window, goes, "Scrubbers,
up yours, Grandad."
Yes,
exactly. Yeah, and then he goes, and they love it. Yeah, I mean,
little
exactly.
Tarts, they love it.
Yeah, exactly. I love that.
We should do a review of that film. You know, I've got a stream
so
where I
good.
review films sometimes. You need to come on to do With Nail and I with us. So
I'd love to. I've seen it so many times, but I haven't seen it for ages. And it's just, every scene of that movie is just a piece of brilliance. The whole thing, you know, the whole thing with the covering himself in deep heat, and the sink, and the Monty, you know, I must have you even if it's robbery. And I mean, just all of it.
it's good, yeah. No, yeah, everything is like infinitely quotable and hilarious. Yeah. Didn't invite you here to talk about that today.
No, I could talk about that for hours, but yeah.
Absolutely. To come back to Me Too, I've been really interested in this whole, like, it's been like years. It's almost like a retrospective talking about it now.
Yeah.
But I think it's absolutely true, and it's so hypocritical, the way that there's this phenomenon happening where we don't have the class divides so much. You talked in your Substack about how you could kind of enter that world of business and you know, enter the corporate world as a kind of, you know, class traitor.
Yeah, absolutely. It was.
And I think the opposite is also happening, where men who are you know, they're working class men, or men who aren't raised on that culture, who enter into the workplace and suddenly, you know, mixing with bourgeois women who've never been whistled out on a building site before. There's just this sort of mixing of people in a way there never was before, in terms of culture, in terms of class, where it's just culture shock. Where you have people who, that everyone feels like they're being a good person in the situation. They just, you know, just having a laugh, or just you know, I'm just asking around, just giving her a compliment or whatever. And then on the other hand, you get these women going like, this is completely inappropriate, and you know, I need an HR representative to protect me from this situation, because I can't just come out and say that's enough, stop. It's easy just to
Yeah.
get someone. It's really embarrassing to say that to someone. So you just got to get like your boss to do it, and it's it's all very messy. And that's not to say that it's impossible for it to work, but I think what we're seeing is just the consequence of this this new world where women can work in the workplace, and anyone can just.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. I mean, you're talking in terms of, yeah, when you're saying about new world, I'm thinking, is she talking about the new world that I'm too old to know about? But actually, you're talking about the new world in which women have entered the workplace.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's just one. That's one of the changes. Yeah, but also
Yeah. It's an
immigration and
experiment, really,
yeah,
because I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, I mean, Jordan Peterson got in big trouble, didn't he, over the makeup comment? Do you remember when he was
yeah.
saying
I made
women?
that's one of the biggest videos on my channel is my response to that particular video about the makeup thing.
But he's got a point.
Yeah,
I mean, I think he's got a point. I mean, everyone
like
lost their minds over it, but I think he was kind of right.
yeah. No, I mean, the thing is, if you're used to if you're really good at putting on makeup and getting dressed to go out to go to the pub or whatever, that's can be completely fine. You probably look great, but it may not be
Mm,
appropriate for the workplace. And
mm,
similarly for men, men are used to talking to women in a certain kind of way, being familiar, being having a laugh, bringing up topics that are a bit controversial. But if you act that same way in the workplace,
mm.
that's not going to fly. You're going to get an email from HR.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a bit different when I went into the workplace when I was, especially when I started off in the city in the sort of late 80s, and it was the whole kind of Barrow boy, kind of Essex boys, and it was the real sort of Thatcherite thing. So you had all these Essex boys flooding into these jobs in the city, and then you had all these sort of Etonites and Harrow boys, and they were all sort of wearing braces and waving their Filofaxes around, and it really was very un-PC, that environment. And the women were also just quite able for it, and I just feel like there's a lot more sort of maybe this is just my perception of it. It could just be my perception of it, and there might be a woman of my age going, I don't remember it being like that at all. But I just seem to remember that it was all part of the course that you would get men asking you out and coming over to you, and it was up to you to just say no. you know and that was that. And it wasn't I don't remember it being a big deal. um Obviously I'm a lot older now, and I've been married for a very long time, so I've not been in that world. I have no idea what goes on now. But when I was, you know sort of in my late teens, early 20s, it was just it you just kind of, that was the way it went. And a lot of older women I remember really gave as good as they got, when it came to that kind of thing. And it was just, a lot of it was actually humorous, a lot of it was banter, and it was sort of tough people. I mean, basically a lot of people who worked in the city in those days, they were quite tough lot. You couldn't really be too oversensitive. And
That's coming back to the childcare thing. That's the thing I really want to talk about, like being
yeah,
tough. Like
yes.
obviously you said earlier. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go on.
This thing, like, so some people are more disagreeable than others, like as a personality trait,
Mm,
and that's certainly true. But I think that toughness is something that you pick up over a lifetime,
yeah,
and having that ability to just say no to people, make it known without cloaking it in loads of what you called management speak.
yeah, yeah.
Without trying to be like, don't try to be polite about it.
But you don't have to be
Just
mean as
talk.
well.
It's
You don't.
straightforward with people.
Yeah, you don't have to be
Um,
mean. I mean, I think people get very confused with this, like with kids as well. They think that being honest and straightforward is somehow makes you a really bad, mean, nasty person. You can be absolutely lovely person, in my opinion, and be totally honest and straightforward. Like with kids, you can be the most loving, affectionate. I mean, I'm very loving and affectionate with my daughter, but she knows I'm very straight with my language. She knows what's what. That you don't do that. That's not happening. Right, it's bedtime. This is what's happening. This is how it's going down. And it's just plain language, and being honest and straightforward. And I think that people are very confused about that now. They seem to associate being honest with being mean. And I think there's a difference, because some people are actually just horrible. You know, I mean, it's not, you know, some people do it and they're just mean about it. And I don't think that's cool as well. I think there's a way you can do it, you know, without being an asshole about it, you know?
Well, you know, the meanest thing I think is to be kind to someone's face, or to be a little bit passive aggressive, and then to backstab their reputation in you know, when they're gone, behind their back, to report that person to their superior, or to
Oh,
just to be mean about them when they're not there. I think
that's the worst.
that can be so much worse
Yeah.
for them, when they don't even know that they've upset you.
That's that. I really can't stand that. I mean, that's so.
But people don't think of that as mean. They don't think of that as being the same thing as directly being confrontational, which can go too far. It could be just right. It could be, you know, you could be doing the right thing.
Yeah. Yes, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I mean, I think I'm talking. I mean, I think if we're talking about children, it's one thing. If we're talking about adults, it's a different thing. But I think with children, I mean, it used to be like, because I was really bullied at school, but I would never snitch. And that was kind of a code that we had, is you don't snitch on people. You deal with it yourself. For better or for worse, if it was my daughter, I would tell her that I'd want to know. Obviously, if I thought my daughter was being bullied, I wanted to come and tell me straight away, you know. But I understand that there is something about the kid that just keeps running to teacher all the time. They did this and they did that and they did this, and there is just something really, you know, it's almost that kind of snitchy kind of thing. It's. I mean, people, you know, I think there's a lot of the sort of council culture woke types are like that. You know, they've just got that kind of snitch mentality. You know, they're going to go and write a letter and complain and try and get you banned from this, and you know, this kind of thing. You know, I think that the kids, they're being encouraged to not be straightforward at all in some ways, and to just constantly expect adults to sort things out for them all the time. And I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem when they get into university, and because there's always the sort of, well, I guess when they go into secondary school and university, there's the sort of like, there's the school counsellor, or there's all this sort of therapeutic stuff in place for them, so they can go and discuss it with someone else, and then they can, you know, they've got someone to sort it all out for them. And I'm not suggesting we go back to when I was at school, which was kind of like Lord of the Flies sort of thing, but I just think that we've just gone way too far, like with everything else, the other way. And I think they need to sort of learn to kind of toughen up. The thing about what you're saying about toughening up, you know, in some ways they're really rude and they've got no manners and they're not being taught that. But on the other hand, they're also being way too coddled. So it's like this sort of really weird double-pronged thing, in that they're letting their kids do everything they want, but at the same time they're coddling them too much. It's a really bad combination.
Yeah, I think the way that to use the word coddle again, the coddling of the American mind that came out a few years ago,
I read
describes this it's like a Gen Z phenomenon. He says Gen Z. He's American.
Yeah.
So what he describes is Gen Z, from when they started in like primary school, the primary schools were becoming more kind of coddled, and then as this generation, as they moved up through first secondary school and then into university, you started seeing it in universities again. And you get all these protesting and cancel culture, and please don't let this speaker speak here. It's not safe for us. Yeah, safe spaces. And it was all the rage like a few years ago. It was like, oh, this is just in the universities. Like, this isn't having an impact in the real world. But then those kids who graduated university, now they're in the workplace. Gen Z are now in their early 20s, and they're demanding this stuff at work too.
Did you see the article in the New York Post about this a few days ago? And
No,
okay, so
maybe.
it's really strange that you should say this, because I'd gone on that stupid training course and I was thinking, well, look, they keep doubling down on all this pandering, yet the data's out. We know that Zoomers are more unhappy, more confused, not, I mean, mental health, if you look at the stats on it, it's really not good.
Is this it? Entitled Gen Z is the most difficult generation in the workplace. It's from a few days ago.
So the one I saw was Jonathan Haidt posted it on the 27th of April, and he said, at Lukianov.
Yeah, he was his co-author for
yes,
Coddling.
Greg Lukianov, and he said, we were going to have a chapter in the Coddling on coddling culture coming to the workplace, but in 2018 there wasn't any data. Now there is. And then he's put a link to...
Yeah, that sounds like this is what I'm looking at.
3 in 4 managers say Gen Z is harder than other generations to work with. And so they've basically sort of surveyed, I don't know.
Yeah, it's just a survey, so it's not exactly hard data, but when you're talking about sociology, it's hard to get anything better than a poll sometimes.
Yeah. But it makes sense though, doesn't it? I mean, it's
they've been coddled throughout their life, and then they're in the workplace, and
of course
there was this kind of optimism that these kids will have to grow up. They'll be thrown in the deep end, and they may throw a little fit, but they'll have to toughen up once they enter the real world. But they haven't, or some of them haven't. Apparently.
Some of them.
So you read some of these. Lack of technological skills was the main complaint that
you see, that's bonkers. That's bonkers to me. I'd think that
lack of effort, lack of motivation, lack of productivity.
Oh my God.
Easily distracted. I'm just chuckling here like these stupid
We're so great. Aren't they stupid?
Poor communication skills, easily offended, lack drive, dishonest.
Oh my God, that's
entitlement. Have you seen that
dishonest as well?
Yeah.
Jesus. I mean,
that's exactly what you said.
This is like this laundry list of sort of bad traits, It's like, I mean, I can't, if someone's got all these, I mean, it's just not good, is it? But maybe, I don't know. I mean, were my grandparents saying that about Gen X?
Yeah,
I'm just sort of throwing in a bit of a,
That's what Plato said about you can find like ancient philosophers saying that the new generation has no respect and doesn't know how to get along in work. In my day.
Yeah, in ancient Greece, there was like all these young'uns wandering around, really entitled.
Yeah, basically, they got no respect. But that thing about the lack of technological skill, that's significantly higher than all those other complaints.
That's so, but you see, that's weird. I would have thought it would be the opposite.
You'd think, wouldn't you? But because technology is so it's so clean now, it's like it's all behind a really shiny UI, right, that works well. So these kids have never had to like interface with the working of the computers or the phones or whatever that they have. It's all just works.
Yeah.
And when it breaks, you just buy a new one. Right? They've never had to like delve into the
the program behind. Yeah. It's too easy. Well, everything's too easy, isn't it?
They never had to type an instruction into the DOS terminal.
Yeah, I mean, me and a friend of mine, she's got 2 teenagers, and we have just such a moan, and the teenagers are just there kind of like rolling their eyes, just listening to us having a good old rant. Map reading, they can't read maps, everything's just there at the push of a button. We had to go out, we had, no mobile phones. I used to have cash for phone boxes, public phone boxes, and an A to Z, and off I went, And I mean, it probably sat, and I listen to myself sometimes, and I think, oh, that's bad, actually. If I was young listening to me, I'd be thinking, listen to this old patronising boomer, having a go at us. But I mean, this article, I mean, if that is real, the data here, how many people, it says 5%, but how many? I mean, how many have they... What sort of research? 1,000?
Yeah, let's get into it. Why not?
Not that
They
I'm
surveyed 1,344 people in managerial positions
right. Okay.
across different industries. So Gen Z apparently are 1997 or earlier. So I did dodge that. I've sometimes been lumped in with Gen Z. I confess.
Well, you seem
But
very sensible, I have to say.
I know how to use a computer. I know how to use a map. Kind of. I've used a phone box to meet a friend back when they had phones in and they weren't all
Have
used for defibrillators or lending libraries.
oh, lending library books. That's so sweet. What about have you used a cassette?
Yeah, no,
VHS?
maybe my family's just poor, but I used to have a like a Walkman cassette player that I listened to. I used to get cassettes from the library to
Oh
listen to on
wow.
my little
Oh well, you're
Walkman.
old. You're one of us.
I think my family was just poor. We had a black and white TV, but it was like 10 years after everyone else had stopped using black and white TVs.
Wow. That's quite mad because I don't remember the last time we had a black and white. We had a big old wooden thing that my dad used to have to bash on the top because the picture would go. It was
Return.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
They think they're better than you, smarter than you, more capable than you, and they will tell you to your face, he stated.
oh, but
Gen
that
Z
is so
workers
true.
are currently aged 26 and under, meaning that much of their working life has occurred amid the COVID pandemic. That's just wild. Just right there.
I
If you're under
can't.
the age of 26, most of your working life, that is like, if you have a degree, if you're in education until you're 21, then yeah, I mean, like most of it for like
That's
3 years we've been in this, and it's been in the COVID pandemic.
it's just that's yeah. So they wouldn't have had face to face contact. Yeah, I mean the other thing is eye to eye contact and communication and stuff. I mean I've heard that I don't know many Gen Zs, so this is all speculation. I've only come across them online, and generally speaking, the ones that I've come across are the ones schooling me, which is I can't tell you how lecturing me about how wrong I am about life, and that's just it's and the sheer arrogance of it as well is just it's mind blowing.
Yeah, I do think that does come with youth, though. Like
Yeah,
that's kind of what I define as the sort of teenager
that's
mindset is
true.
when you're old enough to think you understand everything, but not old enough to understand anything.
Yeah,
Like
it's not.
everything you understand is just from the internet. Like you don't actually have any first-hand experience of any real life experiences, really, but you feel like you do.
It's arrogance and ignorance combined is kind of like one of the worst.
Yeah,
One of the worst things. But it reminds me of I watched recently Good Will Hunting. I don't know if you've seen that
I hate
movie.
that film. Yeah.
I watched it recently because I was watching it with my daughter, and there's that one. Yeah, I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I don't know. I kind of like cheesy movies. I like it is cheesy, but I kind of like it. But there's that one moment where what's his name? Who plays? I can't remember his name. Who plays his shrink?
Robin Williams.
Yeah, Robin Williams. Robin Williams is sitting on the bench with him, and he's saying, "I'm sure if I talk to you about Leonardo da Vinci, you would just reel off a load of stuff that you've read in a book about it and you'd give me the lowdown on it. But I bet you don't know what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. I bet if I asked you about love, you'd tell me a sonnet, you'd talk to me about Shakespeare, all this stuff that you've read, but I bet you don't know what it's like to sit by your wife's side while she's dying and look at her in the eyes and know that visiting hours don't apply to you." And so he does this whole, and
That's why I
actually
hate that film. Is like the monologues are like way
it is
too.
it
It's like
is
some.
no one
It's like
talks
it's so
like this.
obviously been written by like on a typewriter. Like some writer was like, I am so clever. Like I'm bashing out.
Yeah.
This monologue is so great. Like he's like, this is obviously not an off the cuff
It's
dialogue.
not. It's
just
not. But it's
bothers me.
good. It's good. I like that. I like that bit. It did make me think of that whole thing with the Gen Z thing it is so much that they've got all this information at their fingertips. I mean, Google is just the first time I clamped eyes on the internet, I couldn't believe. I didn't really understand. I couldn't really understand or believe. And then it started to dawn on me. What you mean? I can just put something into this thing and it will just come up. I mean, it is amazing. We used to have to go to the library. It's just amazing how much information, but somehow we're more stupid. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
You know.
there's, well, it's like there's a graft to it, like to finding stuff out. If you read a book, this is something that amazes me about reading a book.
Yeah.
Is that you can watch a YouTube video or listen to a podcast about a subject, and you'll feel like you learned a lot, and you did. But when you read a book, like a non-fiction book, you'll learn what the book is about, and then there's a bunch of other like information that just comes free with it.
Yeah.
The historical events and people you've never heard of, like researchers you never heard of, and you just get, it's like 60% the subject of the book, and then there's like 40% just other random stuff that's really interesting that can make you curious about other subjects, and you just learn so much that way.
Yeah, and I think what I was going to say about the kids thing as well is, I mean, I've been doing TA work with like year 1s and 2s, just sort of helping out in the classrooms, and that's been like a massive eye opener, because when I was they're quite young at that age, so I get it to a point, but everything's bite size. Everything is almost like they're learning like they would if they were watching YouTube. So the teacher will do 10 minutes of something, then they got their little whiteboards, and then after that they go around the table and they do 10 minutes of something else, or they do 10 minutes of something with that, and then they stop, and then they have a little break, and then they do 10 minutes of something different. And it's just like all these little bite-sized chunks of things. And I mean, not all of it's even getting marked or anything. It's just so transitory. They're just sort of like, right, we're going to do 10 minutes of phonics, and then we're going to move on, and then we're going to do 10 minutes of this. And I was talking to the teacher, I was saying, is that how it just is now? And she was saying, oh, well, it's just because of attention span, because they can't, and I think, so what they're doing is they're just, as soon as the kids sort of look like they're losing interest, they go, right, we're all going to have a break now. Whereas attention span is something that you train. It's our job to train the children to actually, like, if I have to do homework with my daughter and get her to do something, I can see her when she's drifting off. I can see her start looking, she start fiddling with the paper and she's looking out the window. I'm like, oi, come on, back, and I'm trying to just bring her back in and just focus. You're going to do the next few pages. She's like, oh, no, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. And it's our job to teach them to be able to do that, rather than this whole thing, the kids lead. So we're going with, as soon as they get distracted, right, we're going to stop now. Whereas in the past, they'd make you bloody sit there and do it, and I think that helped. So, I mean, everyone blames the internet for everything, but it's also the way they've been educated. They've been educated in these like tiny little sort of bursts, because they don't think that the kids can cope. But I think that they can, they can just need to learn it over time, and they're not being taught it. So I think there's that as well, which is just, that was a real eye opener. I coming out of those lessons thinking it's a wonder any of these kids are coming out knowing anything with the way that it's set up. It's,
No, I think I think it's the same thing where it makes you the bad guy. It's mean, if you have to keep saying like, hey, focus, like stop getting distracted, like.
Yes.
Being in that position of constantly having to be on top of them, and it's especially with loads of children in the classroom, it takes so much out of you just trying to keep them focused, that I think it's just easier for the teachers to have this like
but is it though?
Scatterbrained approach.
Is it? I don't know if it is. I mean, I just feel like, I mean, like the rows of desks, for example, facing one way, that's all gone. Okay, so you've just got clusters of tables now, and they sort of just sit, this. I mean, I think that actually we were in rows of 2 facing the front of the classroom when I was in infants and juniors, and in secondary school as well. And I remember, the teacher would be up the front with the blackboard, and you'd be writing things down and copying what the teacher was saying and doing the work, and you'd be sat there for, say, an hour. That's how I remember it. Doing one lesson, and the teacher would come round and look at what you're doing as well. I mean, in this situation as a TA, I'm meant to be going around checking all that, but I don't get a chance, because as soon as I get around, then it's 10 minutes up, and then they're on to something different. So it's just this, and again, I mean, you're right about the not wanting to be the bad guy, but I just think that what they seem to be doing with all of this, I mean, it's like me being told you can't make them sit in at lunchtime. But I just think with some of the really sort of badly behaved kids who know they're messing you around and they know there's no consequences and who are really rude or being really out of order, I'm pretty sure with those kids, if I said to them, right, the next time you do that, you're not getting a lunch break. You're going to go and sit inside and you're going to do some writing. And then if I followed through and did that, I reckon 2 lunch breaks missed, that kid won't do it again. I honestly think they'd know. They would be like, okay, actually, I don't want to miss a lunch break here. And I don't think that's cruel.
Even that level of time horizon is like beyond what most, well, maybe not most, but it seems to be beyond what people are willing to see when it's like everything's just focused on the now, like the feelings now, like how they're reacting now.
Yeah.
When really you need to be thinking, like you said, 2 weeks in the future when their behavior is improved and they're better behaved and they're more liked by other students.
Yeah. And I don't think that's a difficult thing. If the head teacher went into assembly in the morning and said, right, okay, we've got some really clear rules here. Some really clear rules. These are the rules. And this is what happens if you break them. And what I was saying about all this sort of convoluted stuff and kids thinking in the binary, if you keep it really simple with children, this is the behavior that we won't have. And if you do this bad thing, then this happens. Whereas they've got us on these courses that even the grown-ups can't get their head round, because it's sort of like this course I was on last week. They were doing all this stuff about, oh, well, imagine if it was like, we've got the cups of water, and if your cup of water is too full, then there's half full. And then we got all these C's for control, comfort, and it was just all this weird, convoluted stuff. And you can see the adults sitting there kind of going, so what does that mean if, oh, okay. And then the teacher's saying, well, it's actually really much more complicated. I'm just doing a kind of summary. And this was like a 2-hour-long session. And I'm thinking, if the adults are struggling to understand it, how the hell are we supposed to implement this with the kids?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that difficult. It's just it seems to me they're doing all this just to get out of being the bad guys. And
yeah, I think so.
Which is completely mad.
We've gone for an hour.
Oh,
and
yes.
I really enjoyed talking to you. I want to get you back to talk about With Nail and I for my other the PO Box podcast, because I love that film. I want to have it.
I would love that so much.
I want to talk about it for 4 hours.
Brilliant.
We'll just sit here and quote the lines.
I'm going to quote every line of that film.
And can I invite you back for other topics as well? What's your schedule like?
I think so. This is probably a good, because my husband got my daughter. So sort of weekdays, evenings are quite good. After about 8's good, actually. Yeah. So
well, we'll definitely get you back when maybe I'll bring a topic to you, and I'll keep an eye on your Substack, see if there's any topics I want to bring you on to talk about more.
Yeah, I've got another. The next one I'm going to do, I think, is going to be about language. So it's sort of kind of what I was talking about today about the office, because I'm sort of tying it in with the office thing and then the school thing,
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely correct that I've never made that association before, except for the the Gen Z thing. But I think you're absolutely correct that it's the same phenomenon in a different setting.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been really good talking to you. I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.